In the alley behind the half-finished new wing of the Library of Congress, the old man stood with his shoulders hunched and a cigarette tucked between his lips. It was late spring in Washington, D.C., 2025. Tourists strolled by during daylight hours, snapping photos of monuments and the White House fence. At night, the city's heart changed its rhythm. The hum of security drones overhead and the distant shouts of bar-goers mixed with the whispering wind. But tonight, in this quiet corner, the old man was waiting for someone. Or rather, someones. Men and women he had invited to test themselves. To find their limits, to surpass them, and to fall into something deeper and more harrowing than any of them could imagine. He heard footsteps, a pair of boots, heavy and sure, and exhaled a plume of smoke. The figure that emerged from the darkness was a wiry, lean ex-Marine named Rodriguez. She nodded stiffly, her face catching the faint lamplight. Behind her, others emerged too, recruits from all walks of life. They had been called here under a strange pretense, offered something nebulous but alluring: power, influence, a role in some secret organization that would elevate them above the petty concerns of the city's political class. They were all lost souls in their own way, people who thought they could start fresh here. Some were veterans of foreign wars, others were disgraced cops, and a few were just desperate fighters from the NHI borderlands, people who had grown up near the secret territories where aliens nested in caves beneath the earth. The world knew of UFOs, sure, but not of these hidden enclaves of living, breathing extraterrestrials that looked so human, human enough to blend in, human enough to lie low, human enough to breed. The old man had once been a hunter of these beings. He had marched through the darkness of unexplored caves wearing a classified patch on his shoulder that marked him as a member of a program the government still did not publicly acknowledge. He'd shot and killed, again and again, until his conscience was a scar-riddled wasteland. He had spent decades scrubbing the blood from under his fingernails, trying to forget the screams of creatures that were not quite human and not entirely alien, a people caught between worlds. In his younger days, he never hesitated. He had never questioned. Now, standing on the cusp of old age, with thinning white hair and a stooped spine, he wondered if he had become the very monster he'd been tasked to eradicate. Regret gnawed at him, and something else too, a relentless fear that, if pushed, he could slip back into that ruthless persona. That was why he was doing this, why he had organized this strange event. The old man didn't introduce himself. He rarely did. Those who had received the invite only knew him as the curator. He gestured towards a heavy, unmarked van. "Get in," he commanded. Each of the recruits gave him and one another a suspicious glance. But curiosity and ambition drove them forward. They climbed inside. Rodriguez folded her arms and said nothing. A man named Lee, a former Air Force pilot with a confident smirk, tried to lighten the mood by commenting on the eclectic group's appearance. Another, Samson, a huge, muscle-bound ex-police officer, kept tapping his boot anxiously. There were younger recruits too: Darian, who claimed to be a martial arts prodigy with a love for shonen anime, Annika, an NHI territory orphan who'd grown up scavenging near the alien nests, and Helena, a quiet genius said to have once served in a secret infiltration unit. Everyone here had a past they wanted to rewrite or escape. The van drove through the quiet streets until it reached an underground facility known only to those who once were part of certain clandestine units. Past security gates that did not require keycards, only a specific sequence of knocks, and down concrete stairs illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights, they entered a realm that did not appear on any official map. The air smelled like bleach and old metal. The halls were lined with tall, grim-faced men and women who did not make eye contact. Finally, the group arrived at a large chamber, an arena. The old man had spent considerable effort to prepare it, decorating its edges with banners painted with stylized kanji characters, constructing wooden platforms and scaffolding that resembled the sets of martial arts tournaments he'd seen in his youth on VHS tapes. There were platforms suspended from the ceiling by thick ropes, twisting staircases leading nowhere, and a circular ring in the center. The old man had spared no expense. As the recruits gazed around, astonished, the old man stepped forward to address them. "You have all come here for an opportunity," he said, voice gravelly. "An opportunity to ascend into a role beyond the petty limitations of civilian life. To join an organization that stands on the borders of human and alien existence. To become a protector." He let the last word hang in the stale air. His audience stiffened. "But only one of you can inherit that mantle. You will compete, here, in a tournament. No ordinary contest of fists and feet, no. You will show me your technique, your cunning, your ability to adapt and overcome. You will face not only each other but illusions and trials of my own design. Fight, and fight well. The winner shall have the honor of stepping into a legacy older than any of you know." The recruits murmured amongst themselves. A few sneered, suspecting a trick. But what was there to lose? They had all lived on the fringes, desperate to be part of something grander. The old man knew what appealed to them: the romance of secret heroism, the prestige of wielding hidden powers. He had studied them, chosen them carefully. Among them was one he suspected had alien blood running quietly through their veins. Not pure alien, of course, hybrids were more common in these times, though rarely acknowledged. They were excellent fighters, heirs to supernatural abilities that most humans could never fathom. But did this recruit know who they really were? Likely not. And that ignorance would be a weapon and a curse. The lights dimmed, and the old man announced the first match: Helena versus Samson. The others backed away, forming a rough semicircle around the central ring. Helena, slender and dressed in tactical gear, bowed slightly, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Samson flexed, veins bulging in his neck. He grinned savagely. The old man's voice crackled through a hidden PA system. "Begin." Samson charged forward, each step shaking the scaffolding. He had once relied on brute strength, but the old man sensed he might have something more. Samson roared, "Titan's hammer," and slammed his fist down. He had trained in a hybrid style that combined boxing fundamentals with grappling techniques, and he had a special move, focusing all his body weight into a single blow. The wooden floor cracked beneath him as Helena dodged gracefully. Helena's eyes narrowed. She whispered, "Spectral sweep." Light shimmered around her fingertips as she activated an experimental technology woven into her gloves, miniature cloaking modules that distorted the air, confusing her opponent. Samson swung wildly at illusions, cursing as Helena darted in and landed a precise blow to a nerve cluster in his arm, causing him to drop to one knee. With a snap kick, she finished him, sending him sprawling. The old man watched, impressed. Helena's technique was scientific, calculated. She thought through every angle. The crowd murmured as Samson didn't get up. The match was decided. As the night wore on, match after match ensued. Darian, young, brash, and passionate, faced off against Lee, the ex-pilot. Darian wore a headband embroidered with the symbol of a dragon and shouted out the name of each technique as if he were a character in one of his beloved manga. He called his lightning-fast fists thundering talon strikes, and his leaping kicks crescent moon launch. Though it seemed silly at first, Darian's fervor channeled a confidence that threw Lee off. Lee tried to counter with jiu-jitsu grips honed in special forces training, but Darian's unpredictable style and relentless shouting of attack names disoriented him. With a dramatic final blow, burning Nova uppercut, Darian knocked Lee out cold. The old man smirked slightly. Darian was stronger than he looked. More importantly, the boy fought with heart. Annika's match was next. She was quiet, unassuming, her eyes always darting, scanning. She fought with twin batons that crackled with a strange energy, possibly a technology gleaned from NHI border skirmishes. When she struck, she whispered the attack names under her breath as if embarrassed by the theatrics. Starfall baton crush, she muttered as her glowing sticks collided with her opponent's guard. She overcame a hulking brute from the Midwest by patiently wearing him down, dodging and countering until he collapsed from exhaustion. Afterwards, Annika looked shaken, as if unsure why she had chosen to fight at all. But her eyes hinted at something deeper, a lingering sadness, as though violence was a language she had been forced to speak since childhood. Rodriguez put on a brutal display. She had no fancy names for her moves, she simply fought with lethal efficiency. But under the old man's watchful eye, even she adopted a certain showmanship, calling out attacks with clenched teeth. Iron Fang combination, she yelled as she landed a brutal elbow followed by a spinning kick that sent her opponent flying. As she emerged victorious, Rodriguez looked at the old man, who nodded curtly. She still carried old scars on her forearms from missions that had never made the news. The old man knew her type, a soldier looking for redemption, who might be swayed by promises of secret honors. As the tournament continued over several days, friendships and rivalries formed in the underground halls. Darian, Helena, Annika, and Rodriguez survived the first round, joined by a handful of others who had shown remarkable prowess: Shinji, a stoic martial artist with a cybernetic implant in his left arm; Fallon, a wiry fencer who used an experimental plasma rapier; and Bryant, a hulking figure who seemed too slow for his own good but somehow kept winning through raw determination. They sparred in the makeshift gym, shared meager meals in the concrete cafeteria, and speculated about the nature of the organization they hoped to join. Over cheap instant coffee, Annika and Helena talked quietly. Helena confided that she had once been part of a secret infiltration team sent into what was rumored to be NHI territory. She remembered strange lights in the cave walls, and whispers in a language she couldn't understand. "It makes me wonder," said Helena, Are we just pawns in some old man's cruel game? The curator. There's something about him. Annika nodded, staring into her coffee. I grew up near one of those territories, she said softly. We scavenged old tech, sold it on black markets. Rumor was these aliens, they're not that different from us. They have families, bonds, traditions. But we only see them as monsters to be contained. What if this so-called legacy is about continuing that cycle of violence? Her brow furrowed. She had hoped this tournament would give her a purpose, but now she felt torn. Meanwhile, Darian admired the arena's aesthetics. He loved how it reminded him of the anime he watched religiously. Each night he would meditate in a corner of the training grounds, envisioning himself as a hero who would save the world from unseen evils. He had entered the tournament believing he could become something noble. He believed that by winning, he would join an elite force that protected humanity, maybe even protected humans and aliens alike, forging peace. He did not know that this organization's mandate was anything but peaceful. The old man watched from a catwalk above, pacing, chain-smoking, and brooding. Seeing the camaraderie grow pained him. He had arranged this tournament for one reason, to find a successor, someone to shoulder the bloody burden he could no longer carry. He had imagined that making it theatrical and reminiscent of the cartoons and comics he cherished in his old age might soften the brutality. Perhaps he had wanted to pretend this was all just a grand story. But the bonds forming below cut him deeper than he had expected. The competitors were not just killers, they were people with dreams, hopes, and regrets. And some of them might share blood with the beings he had once hunted. His heart sank as he realized he might be shaping another ruthless hunter like himself, someone who would repeat the cycle of slaughter. Fear prickled at the edges of his mind. What if his successor eventually learned the truth of what they had become and sought him out? What if he was training his own executioner? The quarterfinals began. Darian faced Rodriguez in a spectacular match. Rodriguez had the experience and unflinching brutality. Darian had creativity and a relentless spirit. The two clashed with thunderous ferocity, sparks flying from their clashing techniques. Comet strike, Darian shouted, launching a flurry of punches that left glowing afterimages. Rodriguez responded with steel vortex, a spinning kick that created a shrill gust of wind. The arena shook as they exchanged blow after blow, the crowd of fighters watching in awe. In the end, Darian prevailed by outlasting Rodriguez, landing a perfectly timed strike to her solar plexus. Rodriguez lay on the floor, panting, a faint smile curling her lips. She saw in Darian a purity of purpose she had long since lost. Maybe he deserved to win more than she did. Helena faced Fallon, the plasma fencer. Their fight was elegant yet fierce, Helena utilizing misdirection and scientific precision, Fallon weaving arcs of glowing plasma through the air. Fallon shouted, "Astral Edge," as he aimed a lethal thrust. Helena, eyes narrowed, whispered "Mirage Cross," and bent light around her form. Fallon struck empty air and then fell under Helena's rapid counterstrikes. It was a merciful victory. Helena never aimed to kill, only to disable. But as Fallon lay defeated, she caught the old man's eye and saw sadness there. She wondered what he regretted. Annika fought Bryant, the large brute who somehow kept winning. She discovered his secret. When pressed, his body emitted a strange hum and sparks of blue energy danced across his skin. Perhaps he had some alien tech implanted, or maybe he himself was part alien. He shouted, "Thunderous Wall," and blocked her strikes with electrically charged forearms. She danced around him, probing for weaknesses. At last, she screamed, "Skybreaker Assault," and leapt high, both batons crackling, and brought them down on Bryant's shoulders. He collapsed, stunned by the overload of energy. Annika felt no triumph. She just felt empty. Her victories were piling up, but so were her doubts. Shinji won his match handily against another fighter who never stood a chance. He never yelled his attack names loudly, only muttering them as if fulfilling the tournament's strange custom. "Shadow Palm," he'd say softly, and his mechanical arm would glow with a dull red light before striking like a piston. He was efficient and cold, and the others regarded him warily. As the semifinals approached, the old man realized who the final four were: Darian, Helena, Annika, and Shinji. Each represented a different facet of what he once considered ideal. Darian with his unwavering belief in heroism, Helena with her intellect and principle, Annika with her conflicted conscience, and Shinji with his ruthless efficiency. Who would he choose as his successor? The old man clenched his fists. Perhaps he had thought the answer would come easily once the tournament neared its end. But now he feared that no matter who won, it would lead to tragedy. In the training bay, as Helena wrapped bandages around her bruised knuckles, Darian approached her. He confided that he had joined because he wanted to be a hero like the ones in his favorite stories. Helena looked him in the eye and said quietly, Darian, heroes in stories fight clear-cut villains. Do we know who we'd be fighting for, or against, once this is over? Darian paused, troubled. He had never questioned it. He said, well, the curator said this organization protects humanity. That must mean they fight threats from beyond, right? Helena shook her head. Threats are not always so simple. I've seen too much to trust blind assurances. Darian looked down at his bandaged fist. He had always thought truth and justice were straightforward. Now a tiny voice in his head asked, what if he had been fooled? Annika studied her batons in silence. She remembered how, as a child, she had hidden in a cave near the border of NHI territory. She had seen creatures, humanoid, gentle, holding strange crystals to their foreheads as if in prayer. She had seen one cry over a wounded comrade. They had looked more human than monstrous. She suspected that the organization the winner would join was the same one that had raided those caves, leaving bodies behind. Had she come here to become the very thing she hated? Shinji polished his cybernetic arm. He remembered the field operations he had participated in, capturing strange beings. He had never questioned the orders. Now he looked at the others and sensed their doubt. He would not let doubt consume him. He believed that might made right, that to be chosen was to have purpose. He did not need moral clarity. He only needed victory. The semifinals were brutal. Helena versus Annika, two women torn by conscience. They fought gracefully, exchanging strikes that lit the arena with sparks. Helena shouted, crystal refraction, and bent light around her strikes. Annika responded, nebula crash, as she infused her batons with a shimmering energy that distorted gravity momentarily. They flew at each other like meteors colliding. In the end, Helena's precision won out. She caught Annika off guard and disarmed her. Annika knelt, defeated, tears in her eyes. Helena offered her a hand, and quietly said, I'm sorry. Annika looked up, eyes filled with sorrow and acceptance, and took Helena's hand. She knew that Helena was no murderer. If Helena won, maybe she would break the cycle. Darian faced Shinji in a clash of ideals versus efficiency. Darian roared his move names, Dragon's Fury, Blazing Wing Kick. Shinji responded with curt whispers, Iron Lance, Silent Guillotine. Their blows rattled the platforms. Darian's passion seemed endless, but Shinji's mechanical arm granted him greater reach and power. They fought for what felt like hours, sweat soaking their clothes, each blow sending shockwaves through the spectators. Finally, Darian feinted a high kick and instead delivered a crushing elbow strike to Shinji's torso. Shinji staggered, eyes wide with surprise. Darian seized the moment and unleashed Phoenix Ascendant Strike. A whirlwind of punches and knees that left Shinji collapsed. When Shinji tried to rise, Darian knelt beside him and said softly, You're strong. But I won't let ruthlessness win. Shinji's eyes burned with anger and confusion. He had lost to a naive dreamer. And that defeat shook him. The final match, Darian versus Helena. Both looked hesitant. They stood in the center of the ring as the old man watched from above, his heart heavy. Helena asked, Do we really want this? Darian clenched his fists, tears welling in his eyes. I wanted to be a hero. But now I'm not sure what that means. Helena nodded. The old man activated a holographic field that surrounded the ring, projecting images of distant caves, twisting tunnels, shadowy figures with glowing eyes, the illusions of the NHI territories that he once hunted in. The finalists gaped at the spectacle. The old man's voice echoed, To join is to bear the mantle of protecting humanity from the alien threat. Show me your resolve. Helena and Darian exchanged blows, each torn inside. They shouted their moves, but with less bravado and more desperation. Starlit Chain, Helena cried, striking with a precise combination. Roaring Dragon Maw. Darian countered, forcing himself onward. Their feet scraped the floor, sweat and tears mingled. Helena managed to catch Darian with a blinding feint, striking his rib and driving him back. Darian nearly collapsed. He looked at Helena's sorrowful eyes and knew she would stop if he asked. But what would that mean? Would he run from this challenge? Darian screamed, final sunburst, and unleashed a flurry of blows that crackled with energy from the very depths of his determination. Helena tried to counter, prism divide. The air shimmered. But Darian broke through, his fist stopping just short of her face. Helena gasped. She could have slipped away, but her heart wasn't in it. She let her guard down an instant too long, and that decided it. The old man's voice cut in, The winner is Darian. Helena knelt on the ground, tears slipping down her cheeks. Darian trembled, unsure whether to be happy or horrified. The old man descended from the catwalk and approached the ring. The illusions vanished, leaving cold concrete. The other fighters watched, bruised and silent. Annika's face fell. Rodriguez clenched her jaw. Shinji glared in bitterness. Bryant and the others said nothing, too shocked or tired to speak. The old man placed a heavy hand on Darian's shoulder. "You have earned the right to join our ranks," he said quietly. "You shall inherit my legacy." Darian looked up, his eyes wide and searching. "But what is this legacy?" The old man sighed. He could not hide it now. He nodded to one of the guards, who approached with a small metal case. Inside was a patch, the same patch the old man had once worn. A patch signifying membership in a unit that hunted aliens, that kept them caged in secret territories. A unit that carried out atrocities in the name of security. Darian's heart sank. He understood now. He had not won a place among noble heroes. He had won the burden of becoming a killer, a hunter of beings he had never known and might share blood with. The old man's eyes were misty. "This organization dates back decades, born of fear and secrecy. I once wore this patch. I know what it means. And now it is yours." Darian shook his head, voice trembling.
I wanted to protect people, not slaughter innocents."
The old man's voice was hollow. "You wanted to be a hero. This is what heroism looks like to those in power. They define the threat, and you eliminate it. You will not be allowed to refuse. You have been chosen." Helena rose unsteadily. "This is monstrous," she whispered. Annika held a hand to her mouth. The other fighters exchanged looks of horror. They had all fought, bled, and yearned for this prize, only to learn it was a curse. The old man looked at them, eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he said. "But this is how it is. If any of you speak of what happened here, if any of you betray these secrets, you know what will happen." He needn't say more. They understood. Their old lives were gone, replaced by silent terror. Even the losers were trapped in this web. The old man turned to Darian, lowering his voice. "I was once like you. Idealistic. That's how they shaped me into the monster I became. Now I fear I have done the same to you. One day, you might learn more. You might discover your own ties to the beings you're ordered to kill. And if that day comes, you'll hate me more than anyone. Perhaps you'll come to kill me." The old man's voice cracked. "Maybe I deserve it." Darian closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. The dreams he had carried were shattered. He was now part of a chain of violence and deceit that stretched back before his time and would continue after his death. He had wanted glory, and he had gotten it, but now he saw its true face, horrifying and bloodstained. The other fighters dispersed, escorted out under guard, their hopes and illusions shattered. Helena caught a last glimpse of Darian's anguished face, silently wishing he would find a way out. Annika wept quietly, remembering the gentle aliens in the caves. Shinji clenched his fists, more determined than ever to find his own path. Rodriguez looked back at the old man with a mixture of pity and fury. Bryant muttered curses under his breath. The old man and Darian stood alone in the dimly lit arena. The old man flicked away his spent cigarette. "It's done," he said softly. He handed Darian a sealed dossier. "Your first assignment will be to lead a team into the NHI territories. There have been sightings. Families have gathered. You know what you must do." Darian said nothing, staring blankly at the floor. Inside he screamed at his fate. As they left, the old man felt his heart grow heavier. He had escaped his old life by condemning another to live it. He had passed on the baton of brutality to someone he had grown to admire. It was a cruelty beyond measure. He could almost hear the voices of those he had once slaughtered whispering in the back of his mind, telling him that he could never wash away his guilt. He wondered if Darian would break the cycle or perpetuate it. Perhaps Darian would one day rise above the lies, leading to a showdown that would shake this secret world to its core. They ascended the concrete stairs, emerging into the early morning streets of Washington, D.C. The dawn's light was pale and unfriendly. Drones hummed overhead. Tourists would soon flood the sidewalks, blissfully unaware of the hidden terrors beneath their feet. Darian followed the old man silently, dossier clutched in his trembling hand. The old man paused at the top step, looking back at the closed door. Behind it lay a tournament that had ended in heartbreak, another link in a chain of events that had begun years ago, before Darian was born, before Helena had joined infiltration units, before Annika's childhood near the caves, before Shinji's cybernetic implant. A legacy of secrecy stretched behind them like a long, dark tunnel. Now the future stretched ahead, uncertain but grim. Darian would have to carry out the old man's tasks, learning the horrible truth of his orders piece by piece. He would discover the secrets of his heritage, the true nature of the aliens he was meant to eradicate, and the reasons why the old man had chosen him in particular. He would face the ghosts of the past and the monstrous reflection of himself that he would become if he followed these orders without question. And when he learned enough, when he understood the scale of the deception, he would likely come for the old man's life, just as the old man feared. But what would that bring? Another cycle of blood? Or the dawn of understanding? Above, the sky was streaked with reds and oranges as the sun rose. The old man and Darian parted ways for now, each haunted by what had been set into motion. There would be no turning back. They were all players in a vast and terrible drama that had begun long before tonight's tournament, and would continue long after, as new secrets were uncovered, new territories mapped, and new battles fought in the shadows of the nation's capital. In the silence that followed, the empty arena remained below ground, waiting. Waiting for the next time. The next successor. The next tragedy. All the while, in distant caves, alien families held their children close, whispering prayers that one day, someone would choose understanding over violence. The stage was set for future struggles yet unseen. The old man carried his guilt like a millstone around his neck. Darian stepped into his new role, terrified and resigned. And somewhere in the darkness of memory was the story before this one, the story that had shaped the old man into who he was, that had laid the foundation for all the horrors to come. All of it waiting to be told, waiting for the right time, when truth and legacy would collide in a final reckoning.